Hi everyone, this is People to Know, insider interviews with the most important and fascinating people in the wine business. And today we have the pleasure of talking to Rupert Symington, who is a friend of mine. Rupert has actually just announced that it's been announced that he is the new chairman of Symington Estates, having previously served as the CEO. Rupert has a master's degree in mathematics from Oxford, something I can tell you I do not have. I am really bad at math, but good at words. And he has an MBA. After working in the financial sector in London for several years, he returned home to Portugal in 1992 to join the family business, making him part of the fourth generation of Symingtons to be in the wine business. The Symington family owns many of the famous port houses that you would know, including Graham's, Dow's, War's, and numerous others, as well as the dry table wines, Pratt's and Symington, Mendes and Symington, and again, several others. Rupert, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, we are here in my office, and you know, the last time I interviewed you was in 2019. You were our very first person to know. I feel like I should have a cake to take out and give you, or something for
just
being.
Just as well you don't.
But seriously, you have just been appointed chairman. You were CEO. What will you do in the new role?
So our non-executive director, who's a lovely lady called Tiffany Hall, recommended I gave up all my executive responsibilities, and I devoted my last 4 years of my career to managing my board. And I said, well, hang on, you know, doesn't sound like much fun. So I'm hanging on pretty much. I've developed the dry wines of the Douro since 1999. It's been very much my project, and we're up to about 250,000 9-litre cases, which is, you know, pretty respectable. It's not quite as big as our port business, but it's starting to become, you know, relevant. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is I've sort of directed the North American business, and that I'm handing over more and more, so I'm here less, unfortunately. And the third thing I do is kind of the shareholder relations, the governance of the business, and unfortunately here there's really no one else in the family who's up to speed on that, so I've got to very short time to, you know, find my heir, a member of the family who's going to be able to, you know, pay me a dividend in the future, and, which is very important.
Yes.
But it's a fun change. I mean, we have a family rule that we retire at 65. That's mandatory. And my cousin Johnny was 65 in February this year, so he's left, and it's quite strange. I've always worked in the business with my older cousins, people you can knock on their door for a word of advice, for, you know, a friendly chat. And now it's only my cousin Charles, who's not much younger than me. He's 6 years younger than me, 5 years younger than me, but he's very much in the production area, and I'm very much in the kind of more the commercial and finance area. So we don't really see enough of each other, but we'll make that right, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you grew up in the Douro, which is, of course, maybe one of the most, if not the most beautiful wine regions in the world. How has that changed since you were young?
Well, Karen will remember very well. I took her on a nice hike in the Douro a few years ago, which ended in a very rocky scramble.
Yes, it did.
So that part of the Douro you know very well. But it has changed. I mean, I think the labour has become, you know, Portugal in the 1960s was, I mean, I'm not allowed to use the word third world country, but it was very much economically, it was way behind France or Spain. And Portugal, having joined the EU in the 80s, went through a transformation. And that came with a lot of European rules, including, you know, minimum wages. So we've seen the social change in the Douro has been incredibly positive, incredibly good, but it has resulted in fewer people prepared to do. I mean, picking and labour in the Douro is not a pretty job. You know, you've got to really love it, and you know, we're now paying, you know, quite a lot over the minimum wage to attract people, but it's always been a problem getting people to work in the Douro. And people in the Douro, if it rains, they don't show up. You know, it's like that simple. It's just they work on the sunny days. And so, you know, that will continue to be the problem. We've tried to introduce a degree of mechanization, but if you remember the slopes of the Douro, they're so steep, they're so
steep,
difficult to work. You know, it's hard to find a machine that will do. So we've figured out we've got sort of mechanically assisted shears for pruning, which speeds things up. We've got a picking machine, which it's basically a narrow tractor with a boom that will pick at least the outside row. It won't fit on the inside row, so at least we can do 50% of some of our vineyards with a mechanical picker. But we're a long way away. You know, 90% of wine in the world is picked now by machine. You know, in nice straight rows with a big autonomous combine harvester that comes through, which we can't use. So we are faced with, you know, we've already got probably some of the most expensive grapes in the world due to our climate, very low yields, very rugged terrain, and with the labour coming up, you know, it's an existential threat. You know, I mean, there's no other word. You know, we have to either figure out, you know, how to sell our wines 25% more expensively, or we won't be able to afford the labour to pick our grapes. You know, so as a family, I've with my two older cousins, Johnny and Paul, we've tried to steer the business. You know, people say, oh, you could, you know, produce a cheap Douro wine and sell millions of cases. I mean, what we need to do is develop wines like Crisea with a price that supports much more expensive grapes. You know, it's fine now. We've got grapes at about, I don't know, 90 cents a kilo, but in the future those grapes will be $2 or €2 a kilo, and you know, that's going to mean any wine under $20 from the Douro will disappear.
Yes,
and that's a reality. You know, it's
right. It's something that I think a lot of consumers don't realize. When you see someone say, "Oh, I can't believe this wine is so expensive," and you think, "Ooh, if you were standing there and in the middle of harvest, watching picking crews in really challenging geologic areas like your own, you would say to yourself, God, why does wine cost so little, right? I mean, it's an astounding fact. You just mentioned Crisea, which is one of your dry table wines that I've written about, many others have as well. It's such a fantastic wine. But I think I remember for much of my career feeling as if the dry table wines of Portugal were just about to arrive. Are they still just about to arrive, or have they arrived?
I think that there's, you know, in the US, I am disappointed after, you know, 25 years of you know, we've had fantastic column inches from yourself, from all the top, you know, US opinion leaders on the quality of our wines, but there's a sort of disconnect between Portugal had a sort of long-term reputation for being an inexpensive wine region or country, led by Vinho Verde, which was, you know, probably the cheapest wine on the shelf, imported wine in New Jersey a few years ago. And there needs to be a reset. There isn't a sort of chain of Italian restaurants or Spanish tapa bars to kind of help, you know, the exposure. But that said, there've been, you know, Crashtool worked really hard for years, Valdemar, ourselves, Sograp, you know, there are a lot of producers who really see the opportunity for not volume brands in the US market to compete with Barefoot. It's, you know, we want wines that would be in the $15 to $20 sweet spot and above, and that's where we need to be for the long term. The other thing about Portugal is that the Douro is probably double the cost of the Alentejo plains, the Ribatejo. So buyers in supermarkets in the UK say, well, I've got this great wine called Porter Sage, that can you produce one like it from the Douro? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't. It comes from a different region, much higher yields, much lower costs, mechanically harvested. But people want us to be what everyone else is. And even our new sales director in Portugal, he's come from outside the industry. And he said, well, why aren't we doing more? And I said, well, we can't. Why aren't we making sweeter wines? Because our customers want sweeter wines. He said, well, we have to persuade our customers to come to our style, not take our style to them. I mean, you wouldn't get, Chianti Classico tipping sugar into its wine to be a bit more like, Zinfandel.
Right.
So I'm kind of, but I sometimes feel like a bit of a dinosaur because everyone wants to be, but the new generation wants sweeter wines and they want this and they want that. At one moment they say they want sweeter wines and they say they want low alcohol wines and they want less sweet wines. And I don't think anyone knows what they want. You just have to be very firm as to what you're producing and why it's good. So.
Every journalist knows that come the beginning of the year, you're always asked, look, what are the trends in wine? What will the trends be this year? And every year, if someone asks me that, I say the same thing. Wine doesn't have trends. It can't have trends. It can't have trends because it's an agricultural endeavor. And if you try and follow fashion, I mean, how do you turn around, a vineyard that takes you 10 years to develop?
I couldn't agree with you more, Karen. This is exactly what I'm saying. It's just, I'm actually anti-trend.
Yes.
When we launched Crisea, the red wines of the Douro, the top ones, or considered top ones, people were over-extracting. They were making wines with 14.5% alcohol, because Douro grapes are very sweet. And the Pratt's family came in and said, let's try and make a wine that's elegant. We would bleed off some of the must before macerating to reduce the potential alcohol. And we were just criticised with Crisea as being much lighter bodied and commercial. Now they're coming nearer to us, and we've got closer to them. True, but I think you've got to be anti-trend. Otherwise, you've said that
Absolutely.
You've got to stand out from the pack. And port is a classic example. People want, the supermarket here wants a lower alcohol port. And I say, well, when did you last have a bottle of Macallan whiskey with less alcohol in it? I mean, you've got to be true to what you do.
Yes.
And it's all about taste. It's not about trends. It's got to taste good. It's a massive movement in the UK towards low alcohol wines. And I would say, if I want a low alcohol wine, I just drink half the amount of wine and then a glass of water. I mean, it doesn't, making it taste less good and last longer doesn't, actually Portuguese kids, forever have always been given, a little glass of wine topped up with water before bed to sort of help them sleep. So we don't go there.
Yeah. Well, when I think about Portugal, one of the, both for port but also for the dry table wines, one of the things that seems to me so true, speaking of truthful ideas, is how distinctive those wines are by virtue of their grape varieties. Even when I was writing the Wine Bible, I thought, I have to take a class in Portuguese. There are like 40 different Portuguese grape varieties at a minimum. I mean, I know that there are actually hundreds. And they have such distinctive flavors that I would see that, I do see that, as an asset. And I remember, too, thinking, I see, too, why Portugal, though a warm, sometimes hot country, has dealt with climate chaos fairly well, because these grape varieties are ancient and they're very well adapted. Mm-hmm. But even that said, you don't want to lose those grape varieties because A, they are well adapted, B, they taste very distinctive, deliciously so. But are you concerned about climate? It's more than change. Climate chaos?
Yeah, I mean, we had a, we had a sort of selection of grape varieties, a study that was done by the authorities in the early 70s, and they recommended maybe 4 or 5 cultivars to plant in the Douro, and there was incentives to plant those. And that created, the disappearance of a lot of old traditional, I mean, they're still there, but they're in mixed vineyards. It was very successful, the program, because it allowed, for the first time, single varietal vineyards to emerge. In the past, in the Douro, farmers would always plant a mixture because they, if the rain came too early, you'd lose your one varietal, but you'd still have the other three. But anyway, we're much more scientific now about where we plant. But Touriga Franca, which is one of my favourites, I always described it a bit like the Merlot of the Douro. It's late ripening, unlike Merlot, but that varietal has had a sort of almost endemic problem now. 5 out of the last 7 years, it's produced much lower yields than it should do, and that's because the heat of the summer is more prolonged. And this was a varietal we planted for its resistance to temperature and for and to drought. And it's just the skins are thin. By the time it's ready to pick in the middle of October, it just loses all its moisture and dries up, and you've just got raisins on the vine. So, we are looking. There's not a lot we can do. We're not going to bring in alternatives, but a wine like Crozea has gone from having maybe 50% Franca and 50% Touriga Nacional to having about 70-75% Nacional, just because the Franca hasn't done well. 2024, Franca came back, thank God, and we made, beautiful Francas, and they are. I would have to say it's my favourite varietal in the Douro because it has that soft elegance. It's got ageability, but it's also got this sort of this fruit, perfume, and it's so nice both in port and in red wine as a sort of a component. We've never made a pure Touriga Franca, but as a it works a bit like Cabernet and Merlot. They complement each other, and it's the one of the two I prefer. I love Nacional, and we do bottle pure Nacional, but Franca is the one that I'm just hoping that we're not looking at, climate change as a sort of, a nail in the coffin for that varietal.
Right. Now, just to be clear, Touriga Franca is not related to Cabernet Franc.
No, not at all.
It's its own.
It used to be called Touriga Francesa, which meant French Touriga, and then because that sounded a bit too French, they shortened it to Franca, which means free.
Free.
Yeah.
Free the grapes. I like it.
Frankish. Rather than French, it's Frankish.
Which is German.
Yeah.
The kingdom of the Franks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's too much history for us right now. But let me ask you, what you have been, the Symington family has been very successful, but you have been also very successful. What character trait do you believe you possess that has led to your success?
I'm extremely stubborn about, what I was just talking about, whether it's being anti-trend, whether it's not changing things. I'm quite forceful, but I do see my own, my own career mortality. In 4 years' time, I'm very anti-cocktails. I think blending fine port is just anathema. I can't, there's nothing. And basically our company is out on social media saying, cocktails. Not me. I'm, and I'm on record, I disagree vehemently with the whole thing. I mean, you wouldn't take, a delicious Chianti Classico and tip tonic water into it. I mean, for heaven's sake,
Right.
And we're not that desperate to capture new consumers that you take port out of its comfort zone, which is the end of the day, end of the meal, traditional moment, which has still got so much to go for,
Yes.
and compete with the tequilas and the vodkas and the gins in a crowded bar space. I mean, the whole thing doesn't make any sense, And at the end of the day, is the cocktail good? I wouldn't know. I've never had one.
Okay, we're not serving you one
no,
today.
Exactly.
And then lastly,
Yeah, you've just got my personality trait.
It came right out.
Good.
Okay,
Well,
good.
that's a good example. Just don't get me going.
Okay. And what would people be surprised to learn about you?
Very good question. I love walking my dogs in the Douro. I love my farm in the Douro. We have a home there now, and we're up there every weekend we can be up there. I'm still 5 days in the office in Porto in the week. But, I think but then paradoxically, I drive 5 or 6 1960s sports cars very fast on Sunday mornings, and I can't do that in the Douro.
I was just going to say, I hope that's not in the Douro.
No.
Those.
So that's a little bit of a.
Oh,
I have
okay.
I have to take a decision as to what my retirement would be. I guess it'll be 5 days a week. I'll be driving nice cars in Porto, and then on my weekends in the Douro. But who knows?
All right. Well.
A different side of me that doesn't normally come out.
No, and I have just made a note to myself when I come to visit, do not get in a car with Rupert Symington.
Yeah,
I am
exactly.
not, nope. Well, if you'd like, thank you, Rupert, and if you'd like to see our entire interview with Rupert Symington, it follows as text. Thanks for watching.